on the beat.
What's up, fight fans? It's your boy Nick Portella, MMA.com. Today, it's actually a little bit different kind of interview than usual. I usually have on fighters and managers and things of that nature. But today, I'll be speaking with Scott Burt, who is the founder, owner, and operator of the Bare Knuckle Boxing Hall of Fame, located in Belfast, New York. Scott, how are you doing today?
Well, hey, Nick, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. I got to thank you for coming on and actually adding information about the Hall of Fame. I think it's great. I've looked at video. I've seen photo. I know everything that's going on out there. I just think it should be a little more widespread. So the best thing to do is bring on the guy who made it all possible.
Oh, well, thanks, Nick. And your timing is especially correct with the big fight in Mississippi coming up.
Yep, Saturday night, Bare Knuckle FC 2, which I'm sure will be as good as the first one, probably better since the first one did extremely well.
Yes, and I know that you know from your research, Nick, that just a couple of years ago I was contacted by the Police Gazette, and am now the sole person in the whole world that's in charge of the iconic Police Gazette Diamond Belt, and I'm the only one in the world who can name Police Gazette champions. And so we've been waiting 129 years for this Saturday to take place, and we're so excited about getting out there. I've been working all day today packing up the trophy, packing up the belts, which is kind of interesting because back in 1889, the last time that the belt made its trip down there to Mississippi, every governor of every state sent out its militia on the borderlines and put up blockades to stop the train because it was all illegal. But now, thanks to the face of bare knuckle boxing, Bobby Gunn, and promoter, the hard work of promoter Dave Feldman, it's all legal. I can put the items on a plane and fly right down there for a nice reception this coming Saturday.
Absolutely. Now, just to add a little bit of history to it, the barns were originally owned by actually Greco-Roman wrestling champion William Muldoon, right?
That's right. He actually grew up in Belfast, and Belfast is so small that even today it doesn't even have a traffic light, Nick. The quick history behind it was that Sullivan wanted to make a comeback, and he had refused Kilrain's challenge, so Fox had stripped him of his belt back in 1887, and then out of the blue in 1888, Sullivan said, "Hey, I'll take the fight for 20 grand and the championship belt," and he had become an alcoholic. He couldn't walk without the aid of crutches. He was in terrible shape. His friends hired him a trainer. The trainer outdrank him. And then in stepped William Muldoon. And Muldoon was the guru, first health guru of his time. Ended up later on in life training President Taft, President Roosevelt, and even Houdini. But he stepped in and said, "Hey, you know what? Let me take Johnny to my farm up in Belfast, New York, and I'll train him there. And if he wins over Kilrain, I'll take 10 grand. And if he loses, I won't take a thing." And so Sullivan hopped on a train, made it up to Belfast, New York, to get away from the limelight. And but boy, just a few days later, all the porches were filled with reporters. The telegraph system was going crazy. Sullivan started his legendary workout in Belfast. He came in at 255 to 260 pounds. In 6 weeks, Muldoon got him down to 195, and he realized that was too little and put weight back on him, so that he fought at 210 against Kilrain.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy because that fight took place on July 8th, 1889, and that's one of the more famous fights in history. Now, I know bare knuckle fighting were illegal at that time in 38 states. And the fight did take place in Mississippi, which was not one of the states that it was legal in.
Well, there were no states. There were no states, Nick, that it was legal in. Not a state at all.
And what's interesting, the most interesting part, is that even though it's an illegal event, there was papers. They reported about the fighters, their training for months leading up to the event and to the night of the event. How did that even? If it was illegal, what's your take on why that even? Like, it was reported as if it was legal, you know, and everybody knew everything. It's just crazy.
Yeah. Well, what a difference life was without being able to reach into your pocket and grab a cell phone and text to someone where you were. Back then you got on a train, whether it be Boston, New York, or Belfast, New York, and you paid $15 for a train ticket that included entrance into the fight. Make it $20 if you wanted a ringside seat. You hopped on it. You told your family, "See you later. I don't even know where I'm going." And they never told anybody. Only Kilrain and Sullivan himself were the only two that knew exactly where the fight was going to be, and that was still a little vague. But as telegraphs went off, saying the trains are on their way, every governor, as I said earlier, sent out their militia to try to stop the train, saying, "Not in my state. It's not going to happen here." And they ended up in Richburg, Mississippi, for the 1889 fight on Colonel Rich's, and that's why it's named Richburg, Mississippi, Colonel Rich's farm. And actually, I've got pictures of the fight. It was the first fight ever photographed. And the night before, I got pictures of when they went out and built the bleachers. They stripped all the trees of limbs so people couldn't shinny up them and get a free view. And they built the bleachers all out of the pine they had just cut down. But during the fight, all the pictures, everybody's standing up. And it makes sense because it was 104 degrees outside. All the pine pitch was wafting to the top of the planks, so no one wanted to get the pine pitch on their clothes. So they stood up and watched it. 3,000 people were in attendance. And that is in Richburg, Mississippi, which is only going to be 73 miles from the site this Saturday in Biloxi.
Oh, see, so that's kind of nostalgic. Now, that particular fight, which we'll never see a fight like that again, after 75 rounds, under London Prize rules, which is bare knuckle, in the 104-degree weather, John L. Sullivan was eventually crowned the champion due to Kilrain's manager throwing in the towel. For me, I don't know if you feel the same way. I feel like that was the end of that era of boxing, and that was kind of the start of the new era of boxing, where they added gloves and it was legal. Is that like a safe assumption on my part?
It is. In fact, Sports Illustrated recently called that fight the brawl that started it all. And but yes, that was the last bare knuckle fight publicized of its era, where a belt like the Police Gazette belt was given. That was the Police Gazette sanctioned that fight. They're the only body ever to sanction a bare knuckle fight, other than in June when the state of Wyoming sanctioned it, and then this coming weekend when the state of Mississippi sanctioned it. Yeah, that was the end of that era's fight. There's some very interesting stories. I'll give you one real quick about that fight. It's always one of my favorites, and when I give a tour, people love it.
Sure.
You see, Sullivan, was a heavy drinker, but Muldoon knew enough that he needed to wean him off of it, but he couldn't take him away entirely. So he didn't allow him still to have one Bass ale a day. But back then, Nick, in between rounds, seconds used to spike the water with whiskey to deaden the pain for the boxers. And what had happened was Muldoon had ordered the seconds not to spike Sullivan's because he had spent a month and a half getting him off whiskey, off of alcohol, and his body wasn't used to it. Well, at the end of the 44th round, Sullivan threw up violently, and Kilrain actually called for the fight to be over and said, "Hey, Johnny, you all done?" And in nicer words than I'm going to say, Sullivan said, "No, the fight's not done. I'm still in." Well, afterwards, after the 75th, when Kilrain didn't come out and Sullivan had won, the reporters asked Sullivan's team, "Well, weren't you worried? Weren't you worried after the 44th when Sullivan threw up? Because you see, the seconds had actually spiked the water."
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, and they all said, no, we weren't worried at all. We know Johnny way too well.
Right.
He threw up the water and kept down the whiskey.
There you go. Now that's a skill.
There you go. Yeah, but fights were a lot different back then, Nick. A round ended when a knee touched the ground. You had only 30 seconds. Once you did go down, to go back to your corner and come back out and put your toe on a 3-foot by 3-foot scratched square in the middle of the ring, called coming to scratch or towing the line. Some of the rounds ended in 9 seconds, 10 seconds. About 8 or 9 of them did because Kilrain needed a break, so he took a break himself just by touching his knee. Some of the rounds went 20 minutes. You see, what Feldman has put into place here is very good. And I gotta wonder if Feldman's rules that he's come up with were back then in the 1880s, if gloved boxing ever even would have occurred. You see, the reason glove boxing occurred was that bare knuckle stretched out for long times, 2 hours. People got bored watching them. So in order to make it more interesting for the folks, they put gloves on the boxers so that you could hit a lot more without damaging your hands, and they timed the rounds. Well, I just wonder if when Sullivan fought, if the rounds were simply timed, where they had a winner at the end of each round, and they tallied up the rounds, that would have made it more exciting. And in Dave's wisdom of having 2-minute rounds and having a determined who's going to win the round, that has made today's bare knuckle fighting very fast and very interesting.
I'll tell you though, with all the history and stuff I've read, I would actually not mind watching this 75 round scrap. It's insane to say 75 rounds for anything that involves fighting.
Yeah.
You know, I think it would be something to see. And now another thing that I've argued, and I actually put up a big article about it, is that bare knuckle boxing is actually safer than glove boxing or mixed martial arts, because the gloves were designed not to save the boxer. The one being punched, it was the guy throwing the punches, so he didn't get damaged. So you can throw more, you can throw harder. What's your take on that? Do you feel like
there's no question that the take is, and the reason why people are still under the impression that it's more damaging is the bare knuckling is because the reporters of the 1880s were very good at what they did. See, they didn't have pictures to put in papers. They just had artists to do drawings of people with their eyes hanging down below their chin, and you could barely see their faces, so battered and swollen. The word is sensationalized, and they did that to sell papers. The fighters never were that mutilated at all. So the reason, like I said, the reason that gloves were invented were to make it so that the thrower would throw more punches. If you ever see an old-time boxer having a little bit of trouble putting words together, they were never bare knucklers. See, bare knuckles is one shot and you're down. You've only got about a 4-inch spot to hit someone below their eye and above, kind of on their cheek. You hit too high, you break your hand. You hit in their mouth, you cut your hand, and game is over. Nick, if I told you or any of the listeners out there to go out and hit that cement wall over there with a glove on, you could hit it 4 or 5 times, no problem. 6, 7. I tell you, take your glove off and hit it. You look at me and say, "What are you, nuts?"
Yeah, that's a half a punch, and you're out.
Yeah. So in comparison to MMA, listen, I can put my hands behind your head and drive my knee into your forehead. And there's pictures all over the internet of people's foreheads dented in.
Yeah, that happens.
So why would a commission say that's okay, but yet a straight bare knuckle shot is not? Yeah. So it was just a matter of being educated.
I think you know what else? I think that on the surface, when you look at the end of a bare knuckle fight, I think the surface damage might look worse because you do get cut and you do get kind of bloodied up. But the surface cuts, I mean, my prime example that I like to use that's current is Joey Beltran and Tony Lopez. Them guys scrapped it out, beat each other up, and at the end of the fight, they were in the locker room talking. They had like a moment, like that's the third time them guys had fought. First time without gloves on, and they didn't look horrible. I mean, there was a couple cuts. I know Tony had something stitched or maybe needed to be stitched in the middle of his forehead. Yeah. But they weren't all swollen down and shut, it didn't look as bad. But during the fight, if you look at any of the photos, and actually when I interviewed Joey, I put some of the photos up. Yeah. It looked pretty bad on the surface, but I also put photos after the fight of those two. Yeah. Well, we all know the face cuts and bleeds more than any part of the body. Right. And yes, absolutely. In fact, I had a lengthy conversation over an hour just before you and I talked with an extremely well-known official, and I asked him straight up. I said, "Listen, I'm not an official, but I have an idea that I have an answer to this question." I said, "When you're doing a gloved fight," I said, "sometimes I bet you just sitting there wondering, has that boxer taken enough hits yet? Should I stop that?" But yet with a bare knuckle, there's never a question. Yep, all over. Done. Yeah. And he says, "You're absolutely right, Scott. Absolutely right." So now I actually want to ask you about the actual Hall of Fame. So, sure. The original location of the barns were across Main Street from where the current location is, and they were actually on the grounds of the Belfast United Methodist Church. That's right. Yep. What prompted you to purchase the barns on your own? You purchased the barns and you had them uprooted and moved, not damaged, just moved. Well, moved. Before I answer that, I'll say moved, and then over $100,000 put into it to restore them exactly the way they were when Sullivan was there. Rusted nails, hand-hewed beams where needed when they were rotted, period pieces of wood that need to be replaced. It's just like stepping back into 1889. But what prompted me is a long story that I'll make short. In 1969, my mom, who was the best-known area's genealogist, took me on a tour. I was 9 years old. I'm 58 now. But I was 9 then. And she took me on a tour, and a gentleman named Pat Patterson was there. And he gave me the tour. And I walked through those barns in 69. And what was neat about it is that Pat was actually in the barns with Sullivan when he was 9. Pat was in his early 90s. And he gave me stories of when Sullivan was in there. He showed me the rings where Sullivan worked out. He showed me the room of repose, which is very ornate, where Muldoon sat and chatted with Sullivan while Sullivan lounged on the couch that's there, and they planned and plotted on what they were going to do. He showed me the cell, quote-unquote cell, where Sullivan was actually chained down when he'd had too much to drink and not allowed, and Mrs. Muldoon wouldn't allow him into the home. So I went through it. Didn't you unearth a whiskey bottle from a secret hatch in that room? Oh, yeah. In that room, there's a trap door, and back then, the people used to want to get on Johnny's good side. So they would, and he loved the people, hated the workout, loved the people. And they would come up to him and say, "Listen, tonight, if you're locked out there, reach underneath the trap door, and there's some booze down there." Well, when we moved the building and jacked it up, I
crawled underneath it and looked right up under the rafter, and there was one jammed right in. It was just amazing. In the blueprint on it, on the front of it, out of Buffalo, New York, dates it right to the same exact time. It was amazing to find that. We found so many different things in there, things that fell out of the walls when we were cutting out rotten rafters. In this rafter, I could have thrown any old way out into the sun. I turned it, and when I threw it out, I saw the sun caught it a little bit. It looked like there's some writing on it, so I went out and looked at it, and it said August 4th, 1884. One of the guys who had built the barns for Muldoon wrote in a grease pen the date, and the locals had never known what the date was, so I knew that. And then there's a huge surround above the punching bag on the ceiling, and people didn't know what that was for. Well, come to find out in my research that Sullivan had to have a surround like that wherever he went, because unlike the other heavyweights, he did not enjoy a heavy bag. He liked a bag that was what we would call incorrectly, a speed bag today. Back then it was a pumpkin ball that was hung on a rope, and he wanted it to move around like a man's head and would bounce off this platform that was up in the ceiling. And as Sullivan got stronger, he started breaking these round pumpkin bags daily. Well, in 1876 is the year that Muldoon was credited with inventing the medicine ball. So as Sullivan got more strong in his 1889 workout preparing for Kilrain and breaking these bags, Muldoon started tying up his medicine balls for Sullivan to hit. And I got pictures of Sullivan working out in the barns, and they are so clear that you can actually stand exactly where he stood and strike the same pose that he stood, either facing the bag or leaning up against the opening in the back where the ramp is, and I gotta tell you that when we unlocked them, they pretty much had pretty much been locked up for 130 years. When we walked in there was all of Sullivan's original equipment. And when we restored this, I worked hand in hand with Burt Sugar. He helped me an awful lot. And Burt said to me, and he's before he passed, was known as the world's #1 historian in boxing. He said, Scott, you know what you have there? I said, I'm starting to get an idea. He says, there's a lot of buildings that have great memorabilia in them, which yours does. He says, but no building that I know of in the world still stands where a known bare-knuckle boxer trained, and oh my goodness, the one that trained in your place was Sullivan. So he was very ecstatic, and I called him back a couple of years later, because this started out in 2009, and I said, I got some more news for you, Burt. He said, what's that? I said, 4 years later, after Sullivan left, guess who trained in these barns? He said, who's that? I said, Jake Kilrain. I got the article.
There you go. See how history puts itself together?
Yeah. It really is the one of the jewels of the boxing world. And wherever I go to Canastota or wherever they all know me. The boxing world is actually much, much smaller than people think. And they love the history of it. And I got to tell you, one of the biggest compliments I have is I get well-known boxers coming all the time for appearances. No one ever charges me a dime because they know that I'm doing it just for the sake of history and for the next generation.
Right. So now you have all these things going on. You bought the barns. You moved the barns. You restored the barns. The Hall of Fame was born. Actually, the same year you finished it, you had inducted the first Hall of Fame class in the same year.
Yes, 2009.
Yes. Who was the first inductee? I mean, I have an idea that it would probably be John Sullivan, but for the interest.
Yes. We had 11 of them that year. And if people want to see not only those 11, but if they want to see the list of all of them that we've inducted, they can go to our website, which is Bare Knuckle Boxing Hall of Fame all written out, Bare Knuckle Boxing Hall of Fame.com. It tells the story. It's got a list of everyone that's been inducted over the years.
So now that place is literally filled with relics that have survived more than 130 years. How many, because I know you have tons of stuff, how much of the stuff was acquired that was just left in the barns when you bought them, and did you have to obtain anything from like an outside source per se for the Hall of Fame?
90% of it, 95% of it are items that were in the barns originally, and that needs an explanation. Remember, it was owned by the church for all those years. Many of the priests thought it was an eyesore and a liability and wanted to knock it down, and actually allowed the townspeople to come in and take things, or they gave them to some of their favorite people in town who showed an interest in them. Then there was a priest in the 50s who said, "Oh no, this is a great thing. We have to keep this," and thanks to him is why it's still standing. But it just sat there. And so once I took it over, and the reason I took it over is I graduated from Belfast Public High School. I graduated in '78 with 22 kids, and I always really enjoyed the town of Belfast, and so if there's ever anything I could do, I would do that, and I never knew what it was. When I came back years later and looked at the barns again in 2008, I said, you know what, these things are just rotting away. I'd be willing to fix these up and split. You know, we charge some admission, and I split it with the church. And they said, well, let me see how. Let me check with our lawyers. It sounds good. Well, they checked with the lawyers. They said, well, no, we can't. They won't allow you to fix it up and charge anything for anybody to see it while it's here on the Catholic property. But they did say, if you make a donation towards our new roof that we need for our church, we're going to give you the barns, but yet you've got to move them. That's the story about how they were moved. But to continue and finish up the story on the stuff inside, after I had them all moved, people saw what I was doing 4 different times on my back porch, and I live about 20 minutes away. I went out, and there were piles of things with different notes on them that said, "Thank goodness that someone like you has got your hands on the Muldoon barns and are fixing them up. These items were in the closet of my grandfather or my great-grandfather or my dad, and he passed away years ago. We never knew what to do with them, so we are returning them to you." So that's how a lot of the stuff got back into the barns themselves. And what's neat about it is that none of it, Nick, is behind a piece of glass. You can actually pick up the Indian, people incorrectly call them Indian clubs. They're actually called swing clubs. They look like a bowling pin that Sullivan worked out with and ran with. You can pick them up. You could handle all of his equipment. You can sit in the chairs in the couch that he sat on. That came back to us from the historian, the county historian. The town historian gave us the Muldoon's chair and Sullivan's couch.
Well, see, you know what? That's people seeing a value in it, and they essentially helped complete the whole picture.
They did.
Without having the stuff. Now, I know Sullivan's original championship belt is currently housed in the Smithsonian, but you were able to have a flawless replica made for the Hall of Fame. If you don't mind me asking, what is involved price-wise and work-wise for a project like that? Because you can have a replica made, but I know your replica could probably go in the Smithsonian and no one would know the difference.
Well, not only do we have that, which was about $5,000 to have done, but we actually have life-size. I actually have 2 life-size hand-carved marble statues of both Sullivan and Muldoon outside of the barns.
And I actually have some good video footage of a tour of the outside of the grounds.
Oh, good.
Someone
Good.
was kind enough to send to me.
Good, good. But let me correct you a little bit on the belt and the Smithsonian. See,
Sure.
when Sullivan loved the belt that was of the from the it was called the Boston belt. It was actually the belt in 1887 that his admirers and fans chipped in and bought him when Fox, Richard K. Fox, the publisher of the Police Gazette, stripped him of it when he wouldn't fight Kilrain. Fox stripped him of the Police Gazette belt. The people of Boston chipped in and bought him the Boston belt. That's what we have a replica of. That's one of the replicas that we have. But what he did is that as he got done with boxing, he still drank and drank more and more. He would pop the jewels out of it to buy alcohol. He pawned it 7 times. The 7th time, Muldoon could not get it back for him. So it was melted down. But before it was melted down, a jeweler made a replica of it, and it was so good they couldn't tell the difference. One of those did get melted. The other one is in the Smithsonian, and to this day, people do not know if the one in the Smithsonian is the original 1887 Boston belt or the replica that was made back then. Then if you go to the Police Gazette belt, that it has been lost. We assume melted because we tried to trace it. In 1927 is what we believe. So I have taken the old belt, the old Police Gazette belt, and from that I have made today's Police Gazette belt, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And we'll be having that with us at the fight this Saturday, as we'll be giving it to, at the press conference, be giving it to Beck Rollins, and then she'll defend it against Britton Hart. But the medallions are replicas of a medallion that was handcrafted in the 1880s. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous belt.
So now that we know where that belt is going, we knew where that belt was going.
Yeah.
There is also a heavyweight tournament going on. Does that warrant a belt that you're involved with when someone is crowned the winner?
I have been talking to Dave Feldman that once they do that tournament and it finishes it off, it would be appropriate, now that we have seen the fighters and seen their caliber, that they get, and I'll have this belt with me too, the American Police Gazette belt. Now, the fine difference between the two. They look similar. The American belt, Nick, we call the Police Gazette belt. It's got one medallion in the middle and notations on both sides. The world belt has got 3 medallions, 3 eagles, and real diamonds and real sterling. And that is called the Police Gazette Diamond Belt. That's the world belt. So we've got 2 belts. We've got the American and we've got the world. Now, as this gets bigger and goes overseas, our plans would be to have a German belt, an Australian belt,
right?
An Italian belt, but just one world belt, which right now in the men's division is held by Bobby Gunn.
Right, and I'll tell you, I actually was unaware, but I was fortunate enough to get the chance to talk with him. I didn't realize how many bare knuckle promotions there are out there, but they're not actually bare knuckle. They wrap the knuckles, and I mean, Bobby's a great resource. He was great to talk to. He knows everything about the sport. He's actually been a really good resource for me, and he's also very cool when you have to ask him something. Like, he's more than willing to answer the questions to the best of his knowledge and stuff. So I definitely thank him.
He's the face of bare knuckle boxing. Without him, simply put, bare knuckle boxing wouldn't be where it is right now today. He spent his entire life getting it to where it is. He's the face of it, he is got the likable personality.
He definitely does. So now that the Hall of Fame is more than established, and everything is where it should be, what are your goals moving forward? Like eventually, I was thinking, would there be possibly another barn made? Because eventually, as this gets bigger and bigger, you're going to have more and more stuff, and you can only pack a building to the gills so much.
I can't wait for you to come up and take a look at it. Our goal was to make it as it was when Sullivan was there, and we have done that. So I don't see it any bigger, but then in the same breath, I want to say that we do know that there actually was a third barn that was not used to train in, but it was right next to it. It was knocked down. It actually was knocked down, and we are trying to consider what to do. And one thought is to build that third barn, but to house the ring that we have. I have acquired from Hollywood, actually, Apollo Creed's palatial. In Rocky II, Apollo Creed had his palatial gym, and in it he had his ring where he was skipping rope, and the trainers were watching it, and the background was all white marble. I actually have that ring that was in Rocky II, and that would be an interesting draw to have that in a barn.
Yeah, I don't even know how you acquire something like that. So that's probably a whole nother story in itself.
It is, but connections, yes.
Yeah, you got to have connections.
Well, it's not like connections, Nick, but it's that people see that I have no ulterior motive other than history.
Right. So I mean, you're not there to make a buck or 20.
No.
You're just doing it to do it. And I believe, wasn't everything you did that was out of your own pocket?
It was 100%, Nick, and I am a retired school teacher.
But it was worth it.
There was and still are a lot of meals that aren't the quality that we want them to be. But I must say that I have a very understanding wife and a very supportive wife. So a lot of people have different hobbies out there. But I don't smoke up money, and I don't drink up money, and I don't go out and play golf. So I use all that money to go towards restoration of the barns. My thoughts are, and I could be wrong, but my thoughts are that we all want to do something that'll still be around when we're not. And
yeah, that's true.
And this is my thing. And so yeah.
Well, what's actually funny is before I was more knowledgeable, for lack of a better word, with the Hall of Fame and all the stuff you did, I actually purchased a piece of the original barn.
Yeah.
That you had sectioned out, and I have the card that you wrote all the information on, and there's the plate on it. I actually have it in my media room, a piece of the wood. So it's kind of cool that weeks and weeks later, now we're sitting down and we're actually getting into talking about it. Yeah,
and it's where else can you go and you can actually buy a piece of the barn? And what we did is as we restored and had rotten pieces of wood, we salvaged out little squares here and there. And then 100% of that money goes towards the constant restoration and maintenance needed for these barns. They're built in 1884. When we got them, they were down in the mud 22 inches. And although we looked at the pieces of rafters going around the outside, they looked solid. But once we cut one, the entire inside of this 10 by 10 inch rafter was completely hollow because the bugs had eaten it to nothing.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, it's definitely a interesting conversation piece. Everybody seems to be like, what is that block of wood?
Yeah.
What's the block of wood with the plate? So
I
I decided to become knowledgeable about it. So
there you go.
Explain it to people.
Yeah.
Now, for you, is there anybody that, you know, you want to thank or shout out or anything? I want to give you definitely the floor to say whatever else you would like to say
Well,
before we finish.
yeah. Well, let's see. There are people I'd like to thank, but you know what, Nick? Instead of thanking those people, I'd like to thank you for giving me a call. You know, the more media, the more people that are interested that want to do articles, the better for everybody. I don't always do a lot of interviews, but when you had asked me about it, to be honest, I called a few people and they said Nick is a good guy. Give him an interview, and I'm not. It's not like I play hard to get because I don't, but I'm always very careful with who I interview with. So I want to thank you because your reputation preceded you, and
That's good to hear.
yeah. And I'm glad that you thought enough of us to include us in your interview and then in your stories for your listeners. And you know, we held off on the first event out in Wyoming. We wanted to see how everything went, and boy, it went so good. Dave did such a great job out there. Now it's all coming together because now the icing on the cake. It is, you know, the first time a lot of the talk was about the ring, about the round ring, and how that was built by Grant out in Pennsylvania, and he did a great job with that. Well, now in this fight, the fight two, a lot of talk is going on about the belts. So I'm glad that we waited to give the folks another thing to look forward to besides the awesome event that Dave is putting on, to see the actual belts. And, you know, the last time this belt was ringside was in 1889, and it was in Mississippi. And since then, it's been put away. And before that, it was only one other place, and that was Mississippi too, and that was 1882, and that was only 3 miles from Biloxi, and that's when Patty Ryan lost to Sullivan for the American Championship. 5,000 people were there, and it was so important that even Jesse James was there in disguise. So I know that you and I could talk forever and ever about history.
Yeah.
Some people enjoy it. Some people say, "Oh man, I gotta change the channel and get away from that." But you can tell from talking with me for a half an hour that it's my passion, and I'm glad that we have a vehicle to promote it. And in this whole new sport that was what was old is new again. One hand washes the other all the way through. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I know for one, it's about a 5.5-hour drive for me, but I will absolutely be visiting. I'll let you know in advance.
Yeah.
For me, I have to thank Scott. Again, it's you know, to get people on for interviews, there's a big trust, because you never know what somebody's going to ask you in advance. I got to thank whoever you talk to, who confirms my reliability for all this. Absolutely thanks to Dave Feldman, Ed Simpson, Bobby Gunn, and anybody that was involved with the first event, all the fighters and people involved with the second event. Again, if you want to see anything or know any more about the history, you can go to BareKnuckleBoxingHallOfFame.com, or on Twitter, you could follow at BKBHOF. As for me, it's at Nick Portella MMA on all social media outlets. And again, Scott, thank you for coming on. The day will absolutely come where we will meet in person, whether it be at an event or at the Hall of Fame, because I'm going to go to both. And
just as long as it's not in the middle of a ring, Nick.
Yeah, I'm too old. I'm too old for all that. Some of them guys are scary. But, you know, as things progress and more belts come to light or whatever happen, I'd absolutely love to have you on again and we could talk about it.
Oh, Anytime, Nick. More than happy. You're a great interviewer, and nice job.
I appreciate that. And again, thank you again, and we will move forward as things happen.
All right. Thanks for the call.
All right. You have a good night, Scott.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.